Maharaj did not desire in the beginning to engage in the service of the Lord, but he wanted an exalted position better than his great-grandfathers. This is more or less not service to the Lord, but service to the senses. Even if one gets the position of Brahma, the most exalted position in this material world, he is a conditioned soul. Srila Prabodhananda Saraswati, Shri Radha Govinda ki. Srila Prabodhananda Saraswati says that if one is elevated to real, pure devotional service, he considers even great demigods like Brahma and Indra to be on an equal level with an insignificant insect. The reason is that an insignificant insect has a desire for sense gratification, and even a great personality like Lord Brahma also wants to dominate this material nature. Sense gratification means domination over material nature. The whole competition between conditioned souls is based upon domination of this material nature. Modern scientists are proud of their knowledge because they are discovering new methods to dominate the laws of material nature. They think that this is the advancement of human civilization. The more they can dominate the material laws, the more advanced they think they are. Dhruv Maharaj's propensity in the beginning was just like that. He wanted to dominate this material world in a greater position than Lord Brahma. Therefore, elsewhere it is described that after the appearance of the Lord, when Dhruv Maharaj thought and compared his determination to his final reward, he realized that he wanted a few particles of broken glass, but instead had received many diamonds. As soon as he saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face, he immediately became conscious of the unimportance of his demand from the Lord to have an exalted position better than Lord Brahma's. When Dhruv Maharaj became situated on the Vasudev platform, due to seeing the Lord face to face, all his material contamination was cleared. Thus he became ashamed of his demands, and thus he became ashamed of what his demands were and what he had achieved. He was very much ashamed to think of that although he had gone to Madhuvan, giving up the kingdom of his father, and he had gotten a spiritual master like Narad Muni, he was still thinking of revenge against his stepmother and wanted to occupy an exalted post within this material world. These were the causes for his moroseness, even after he received all the desired benedictions from the Lord. When Dhruv Maharaj factually saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there was no question of a revengeful attitude towards his stepmother, nor any aspiration to lord it over the material world. But the Supreme Personality is so kind that he knew that Dhruv Maharaj wanted these. Speaking before Dhruv Maharaj, he used the word Vedaham, because when Dhruv Maharaj demanded material benefits, the Lord was present within his heart, so knew everything. The Lord always knows everything a man is thinking. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita also, Vedaham Samatitani, chapter 7 and verse 26. The Lord fulfilled all Dhruv Maharaj's desires. His revengeful attitude towards his stepmother and stepbrother was satisfied. His desire for a more exalted position than that of his great-grandfather was also fulfilled, and at the time his eternal position in Dhruvaloka was fixed. And at the same time his eternal position in Dhruvaloka was fixed. Although Dhruv Maharaj's achievement of an eternal planet was not conceived of by him, Krishna thought, what will Dhruv do with an exalted position within this material world? Therefore, he gave Dhruva the opportunity to rule this material world for 36,000 years with unchangeable senses and a chance to perform many great sacrifices and thus become the most reputed king within this material world. And after finishing with all this material enjoyment, Dhruv would be promoted to the spiritual world, which includes the Dhruvaloka. Om Ganatimirandasya Ganangala Shalakaya Chakshurun Militamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Minobistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadapmayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Savajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Savetam Savadutam Bharajana Sahita Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Param Sahagana Lalita Shri Vikam Vitam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakapatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Piyevacha Patitanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavabhyo Namo Namaha. So, as we can see, that was a very extensive purport to this important verse here in the Srimad Bhagavatam by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. So, on the previous day, on Friday, I began to unpack some of this purport, focusing on why Dhruv Maharaj had this lamentation and remorse for, even though he has achieved the greatest achievement. So now I'm going to look at some of the other themes of this purport, namely the 5 types of liberation. So let's just look at these briefly. So I'll run through them and we'll see who can remember what each of these means. So we have Salokya. Does anyone remember what this kind of liberation is? Yes, Loka, yes. Liberation, that one gains the same residence, so goes to live in the Vaikuntha planets where Lord Narayan resides. And we have Sarstri. Yes, excellent Anshu. The same opulences. One acquires the same opulences or wealth as Lord Narayan and also lives in that Vaikuntha planet. And Sarupya, the same form as Lord Narayan, the 4 arms, and living in the Vaikuntha planets. Sampya. Yes, association. One becomes the personal associate of the Lord and lives in his direct association. This kind of liberation is achieved by such devotees like Arjuna, who was always the friend of the Lord. And then finally we have the one which Srila Prabhupada is focusing on here, to explain more about it and why, as Vaishnavas, we do not regard it as true liberation, which is Sayujya, which is the liberation attained by yogis and jnanis, the liberation, or so-called liberation, where one becomes one with the Brahma Jyoti. And the interesting thing is, of course, that kind of liberation is not very hard to attain, because who else we can see in different pastimes in the Krishna Leela, who else attains such liberation like this? The demons, exactly, the enemies of Krishna, such as Lord Kamsa. They actually are able to attain this kind of liberation. So as devotees of Krishna, we do not regard actually any of these forms of liberation to be something that we are aiming for, because what we really want is we want to get the mercy of Krishna and ultimately to go home back to Godhead, back to Goloka Vrindavan. So to further understand this and to understand the different elements that we're talking about in this regard, let's compare Vaishnavism, which is pure unmotivated worship of God in loving reciprocation. Let's compare it to 24-karat gold. So 24-karat gold is pure gold, completely flawless, with no impurities. So other systems of worship, or merely to acknowledge that there is, that Krishna is there, are just like the different kinds of gold that we can readily get in the marketplace. 22 karat gold, 18 karat gold, 14 karat gold, and even in some countries, like the UK, you get 9 karat gold, which I know in the US you don't even consider as gold because there's more other stuff in it than there is gold, right? So all of these are readily available. All of these lesser qualities of gold, pretty easy to get in the marketplace, in the jewelry store. More commonly, you'll find the 18 karat, 14 karat around, I think, here in the USA. But the 24 karat gold is pure unmotivated devotee. And that is actually, of course, just like real 24 karat gold, is very, very rare. It's hard to find. It's hard to find something which is not adulterated or mixed with some other thing. In other words, that we have the phrase that pure bhakti is unalloyed. So we can understand here in this comparison to gold, all these other types of gold, they're an alloy actually of gold. They have other things mixed into them. However, that pure devotional service, or the 24 karat gold, does not have any other things mixed in it. Just like we talk about the meaning of sincerity from the Latin word, meaning that when something was sincere, it means that it's without the wax, which was used to fill in the marble. So it's without any other thing filling in the gaps. It purely is the thing which it is stated to be. So most aspirants on this path do have mixed motives. However, the pure devotee, just as we see with the example of Srila Prabhupada, the pure devotee never discourages any of the other participants who have mixed material motives. For slowly, as we can see by this example of Dhruv Maharaj, of course his example was a little bit on the fast track, but as we can see by our own living examples, by our own selves, and others that we've seen before us, the transformation of the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, for instance, we can see that by this process and by the participation, that there will be purification of the initial intention, just as there was with Dhruv Maharaj, who, of course, transformed his material desires into ultimately that catalyst which gave him pure love of God. So the thing that's actually highly unusual about Dhruv Maharaj himself is that he was actually entirely self-motivated. Most of us, in most cases, as is written and as is today, we are usually needing that association of the devotees. We need association of saintly devotees in order to act as our catalyst, in order to keep us motivated on this path, and which ultimately leads to this transformation within us. So the other day, I briefly touched upon the 7 purposes of ISKCON. And within that, we can understand from, I think it's at least 2 or 3 of the different purposes that are there, that one of the main and crucial purposes of this international society for Krishna consciousness is to provide that devotee association, that saintly association for all of its members and essentially to humanity at large. So therefore, that the inspiration can be provided to allow others to actually push forwards in their devotional life and become steadfast, and of course just get onto that step ladder of the process of devotional service and increase their faith, increase their sadhana. So of course many of you will know that example of the sticks. Who knows the example of the sticks? Yes, of course. So in that example, what's happening is if we just grab one stick, it's quite, it's flexible, it bends to the flex easily, and ultimately, easily we can break that stick because it's on its own. However, if we get the same quality of sticks, but we gather more of those, maybe 10 sticks in a bunch, it's very hard. There's no flexibility there when the sticks are all bunched together. and it's very hard to break. So ultimately we can understand that that means that together it's much easier to be unbreakable, to be steadfast, and to strengthen our faith and our devotional, our daily practice, our sadhana. So it can be understood that this process of Bhakti Yoga, as given by Srila Prabhupada, and as proliferated and spread throughout the world in the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, it really is a team sport. We can really put ourselves on a fast track by gaining this devotee association and by doing this together with the support of one another. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions King Kulashekar. So let's have a little look, for anyone who doesn't know, or for those who would like to gain further information, of who is King Kulashekar. So King Kulashekar is one of the 12 Alvars. So these are the chief saints of the Sri Vaishnava tradition of South India. The name of King Kulashekar is well known to the followers of Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada, as it's written here in the purport, he used to relish the Mukundamala Stotra written by this great saintly king. And within our society, these prayers are commonly known as the prayers of King Kulashekar. So let's look briefly at this idea of who are these Alvars. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it is stated that in the age of Kali, those persons who drink the waters of the holy rivers of the Dravida Desh, in other words, South India, such as the Tamraparni, the Kritmala, and the Payasvini, the extremely pious Kaveri, and the Praktichi Mahanidhi, will almost all be pure-hearted devotees of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vasudeva. So these Alvas are the 12 especially great devotees who appeared in South India. According to the traditions of the Sri Vaishnavas, one of the 4 disciplic successions of Vaishnavas, devotees of Krishna or Vishnu, the Alvas are not ordinary living jivas, in other words, living entities, but are incarnations of the Parasadas, the paraphernalia of Lord Sri Krishna. So in Tamil, the word Alva means drowned in love of God. So according to the Sri Sampradaya, they actually appeared over 5,000 years ago. And they all composed devotional songs, mostly in the Tamil language, in praise of Lord Krishna and his incarnations. The songs embody elevated knowledge of the science of God, and the followers of the Sri Sampradaya consider them as good as the Vedas. The acharyas, or great spiritual teachers of the Sri Sampradaya, learned not only the 4 Sanskrit Vedas, but also the Tamil Veda, or the Divya Prabnabhana, consisting of the 4,000 songs. That's prolific. 4,000 songs of the 12 Alvas. So King Kulashekar wasn't always a devotee of the Lord, but via the mercy of Krishna, he actually became one. So again, this is another wonderful example of somebody that through the devotees of Krishna is given that mercy to actually become his devotee. Then, once he became the devotee of Krishna, he began to, as all of the Alvas do historically, he began to write these beautiful devotional songs, poetry. He was a king, of course, but he felt shackled to the throne and could find no happiness in royal wealth or the splendor. To alleviate his spiritual thirst, he would often invite sages into his capital. So with them, he carefully studied the Vedic scriptures, and he plucked out the best pearls of wisdom and strung them into a garland, a mala of poems, which is then called the Mukunda Mala, which is this text that Srila Prabhupada is referring to. Being particularly fond of this work, Srila Prabhupada would often sing one verse in particular. I will try to sing this. I don't know the meter, so please forgive me. Krishna tvadiya pada pankaja panjata rantam Advaiva mevastu manasya rajahamsa pranaprayana samyekapavata pite kantavarodhana vidusmaranam kutaste. Translation is, O Lord Krishna, let the royal swan of my mind now enter the tangled stems of the lotus of your feet. How will it be possible for me to remember you at the time of death, when my throat will be choked with mucus, bile, and air? So, this is just a little bit about the glories of the wonderful devotee, the Alva King Kulashekar, who actually, in his final days, he went to the shrine of Namalavar at Tirunagri, which is actually what we understand as the Adikeshava temple. So there, at the age of 67, he returned to the spiritual world. And incidentally, actually in this Adikeshava temple, where it is the same place where Lord Chaitanya, when he went on that wonderful South Indian tour, he actually found the scripture, the Brahma Samhita there. So it's interesting. So another one of the examples that's given here, right after this example of King Kulashekar's Mukunda Mala, is the Shikshastakam, something which we recite practically every day. From the verse, is a part of the verse which is taken is Nadanam Najanam Nasundarim, which literally, this word Sundarim, when you look it up in the Sanskrit dictionary, it literally translates to also mean beautiful or poetic praise. So we can understand furthermore when we unpack this Shikshastakam, this particular verse, this particular sentence, this particular Sanskrit word, that Sri Chaitanya is also instructing his followers not to be swayed by the donations of the followers or the flattering words, as well as what we have adopted, the meaning as meaning beautiful women. So Srila Prabhupada, as we saw there, he's talking about these 5 different kinds of mukti, but how ultimately, as is given in the verse that he refers to, in the Canto 10, chapter 2 and verse 32, the translation of which is, O lotus-eyed Lord, although non-devotees who accept severe austerities and penances to achieve the highest position may think themselves liberated, their intelligence is impure. They fall down from their position of imagined superiority because they have no regard for your lotus feet. So again, we can understand here what is the reason for this falling down. Srila Prabhupada is telling us it's about our intelligence being impure. So in that purport, Srila Prabhupada describes that there are many other kinds of person, aside from the devotees. The non-devotees, known as karmis, jnanis, yogis, philanthropists, altruists, politicians, impersonalists, and voidists. And of course, there are many varieties of non-devotees who have their own respective ways of liberation. But because they do not know, because they do not have that knowledge of the Lord's lotus feet, and falsely they may understand that they have been liberated through their own endeavor, through their own hard work, ultimately they still fall down, as is stated by the Lord himself in the Bhagavad Gita. So it doesn't matter that if one is a karmi, a yogi, a jnani, whichever thing, if one has no love for the lotus feet of the Lord, he will ultimately again fall down. So what's interesting is actually in this particular purport from the 10th canto, Srila Prabhupada mentions Dhruv Maharaj. So I'll read this part. Dhruv Maharaj at first wanted to achieve the greatest material kingdom, greater material possessions than his father. But when he was actually favored by the Lord, who appeared before him to give him the benediction he desired, Dhruv Maharaj refused it, saying Svamin karatosmim varam na yache, which is from the Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila 22:42. Now I am fully satisfied. I don't want any material benediction. This is the perfection of life. If one achieves the shelter of the Lord's feet, one is fully satisfied and does not need to ask for any material benediction. So again, we can understand this analogy of comparing the pure devotee to that of 24-karat gold, and that the process of devotional service is about gradually becoming unalloyed, gradually removing all of the impurities, gradually getting more and more elevating ourselves to being very sincere. Because ultimately, if we have any kind of impurity within us, it will mean that our intelligence is impure and we will again fall down. So, why is it that that ultimately these other forms of liberation are not eternal? We all know the nature of the soul. Who knows the nature of the soul? Exactly. Back to Dustin. Satchit Ananda Vigraha, which means eternal, full of knowledge and bliss. So, understanding that, what is the prime thing that all souls crave? Anandamaya Vyasat, connection, relationships. So, this is the reason why impersonal realization and practices ultimately do not last forever. In other words, you could say do not work ultimately. They're not eternal. Because the jiva is a unique spark of the Supreme Personality, who ultimately, of course, is seeking to be reunited with the Supreme Personality in rasa, in relationships, not simply energetically. So it's only by doing this that one will get full satisfaction of the soul. So here we can understand the importance of what? Of devotional service, which means the activities of rendering service to the Lord, as is stated here in the purport. So in the spiritual world, what will there be? What will be happening there? What will we be engaged in? Devotional service and more chanting. However, we'll be completely absorbed in this. So we won't even be really thinking about, we won't be looking and seeing today I'm to do this thing, and that means I can fit in this other thing and this other thing. It will all just be pure absorption. There'll be more chanting, there'll be more service. So as we know here in this material world, as we discuss often, the jiva craves to be of some kind of service. As is written here in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that these persons who are non-devotees, people who are materialists, politicians, they're all in the service of Maya. So we have to choose our masters carefully. The path of Krishna consciousness involves active service, selfless service, which will ultimately lead us to becoming unmotivated, uninterrupted, ahoitiki, causeless and aparitahata, unbroken. So there was another great Vaishnav saint that was spoken about in this purport, and that is Srila Prabhanodana Sarasvati. So he was actually a prominent devotee of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And he is known for, again, meeting Lord Chaitanya in South India when Lord Chaitanya was on his South Indian tour. Very interestingly, he is another example of a devotee who was previously part of the Sri Sampradaya, but then once after meeting Lord Chaitanya, decided to become converted to the line of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, fully embracing Gaudiya Vaishnavism. He then authored several Sanskrit texts, such as the Chaitanya Chandamrita, Radha Rasa Sundanidhi, Sangita Madhava, Vrindavana Sakta, and the Navadvip Sakta, which elaborate on Lord Chaitanya's divine nature and the glories of his devotional service. He also had a very close relationship with Gopal Bhatta Goswami, who instructed him in the scriptures and devotional practices. Interestingly and notably, it is understood that Prabodhananda Sarasvati had a profound understanding of rasa, of the spiritual mellows, and his ability to express the divine intricacies of love were particularly noted upon. And some even suggest that he could be Tungavida Gopi, one of the 8 principal cowherd girls. So we can see that the Srimad Bhagavatam is incredibly rich in inspiration, which allows us to understand the great love that actually Sri Krishna has for us, for all of his devotees, and the length in which he will go to remind us of this. Because again and again we see these different twists and turns where Krishna is present as Paramatma in everybody's heart, understanding the desires of his devotees, ultimately fulfilling that tenfold, thousandfold, like unimaginably fold, and also bringing his devotees ultimately back home, back to Godhead. So in these beautiful, wonderful, dramas, examples, we can gain inspiration to let our own life be such a ballad, such an offering, a song of poetry and expression, just in a same, essentially, but more minute way. I mean, each and every one of us, when we're, the embodied being, it is constantly that we're living in our own universe, our own episode of our life today, day 3,536, whichever thing it is. Each day we're living out this drama where we have this choice to ultimately choose to move ourselves towards Krishna or to serve Maya. And ultimately, what we're trying to do here, as we all know, is try to make sure that more and more often, and then always, that we're choosing that path to go towards Krishna so that we can go back to Godhead. And it's by these different wonderful inspirations, knowing that even though ultimately at first we could have an impure motive, an impure desire, that Krishna will see us nonetheless, and he will be inspired by the service that we are giving. As it's stated here in the purport, that Krishna is really seeing that service. Even Srila Prabhupada said that those of us, especially those of us who are given this mercy by none other than Srila Prabhupada, by spreading this Krishna consciousness to all of the different countries of the world, bringing it out of being specifically in India and spreading it everywhere, and freely giving this knowledge. We're freely giving in the street, we're freely giving the name, we're freely giving prasadam, trying to give this knowledge. That even those who are born in unqualified situations, ordinarily it would be unqualified if you are born in a family who didn't practice this, so you didn't know this from your birth. That even those, Srila Prabhupada actually said that those disciples of his, which come from such backgrounds, that Krishna only sees the service. He doesn't, the faults which are there are not so much seen by Krishna. He only sees the service because there's that much mercy given to us. So on this note, I will end here and open it up for questions or comments. We have about 5 minutes left until 9 a.m. Okay. Oh, yes, Kanagopal. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. I have a question. If Krishna, you just mentioned how he doesn't see our faults, but could you elaborate on that? Because he's seeing everything, including our faults, but I am understanding that the point you're making, that he sees the best in us in terms of potential of serving him as well. But could you talk about how he specifically sees our faults and works with our faults and purifies our faults?
That's a beautiful question. Thank you so much, Kanagopal. So as we know, when we're trying to participate in this process of devotional service, we receive the most mercy when we are constantly trying to progress a little bit more incrementally each moment, each day, by pushing ourselves that little bit more to do just a bit more for the devotees, ultimately for Krishna. And in this way, it's understood that rather than us trying to see Krishna, Krishna will then see us. So when we do this, when we step out of that that plateau of like, okay, I'm here, this is what I'm doing, this is comfortable. When we try to push ourselves that little more, it is understood and it's written that Krishna will actually fulfill all of the things that we lack. So in this same way, Krishna's seeing because it's kind of like you can compare it to. We can compare ourselves to children. And the parent, when he sees the child is making some kind of an effort, like, even just to walk. There's some effort made to walk, but every now and again, the child is falling down. But generally what the parent tries to do, rather than say, oh, you've fallen. No, more encouragement is given. More encouragement is given. Again, stand up. Again, carry on. Again, continue. So in the same way, we're always being encouraged to continue. Krishna never puts us in a position where it's too much for us, even though sometimes it can be a lot. It's always just okay. And there's always some mechanism that is there which again encourages us to again continue, again stand up. The particular example that I was using was actually in a conversation in a room where Srila Prabhupada was talking to one of his disciples in Vrindavan. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of this disciple. However, he was Indian-bodied. And he was seeing that many of, at this time, the 1970s had begun, of course they're in Vrindavan. Srila Prabhupada had begun to make sannyasis of his disciples. Because why was this happening? Even though they were still very young, there was a need. There was an urgency for this. There was a need to set up the system of Varna ashram and to ensure that things would go on as Srila Prabhupada desired in some way. So, seeing this, a very qualified young Indian student of Srila Prabhupada went to Srila Prabhupada and said, I see you're making many of these young American boys into sannyas. I also would like to be given this honor. I should be given sannyas. And actually, it's interesting to note the background is this young man had come from a Brahmin family and he had lived in ashrams before, not ISKCON ashram, not specifically Gaudiya Vaishnava ashram, I believe, but he had the training. He was Brahminical. So he went to Srila Prabhupada and said, I feel I'm also qualified if you're initiating these young men. Srila Prabhupada looked at him and studied, and he replied. This whole conversation was happening in English, and Srila Prabhupada paused and said, it is better you stay brahmachari. And this brahmachari still wasn't satisfied by this answer. So again, he asked again, but Srila Prabhupada, he was insisting. He asked 3 times. Srila Prabhupada replied again, the second time, it is better you stay as brahmachari. So in the 3rd time, Srila Prabhupada actually then spoke, I think it was in Hindi, I'm not sure, it was either Hindi or Bengali. He then replied, because of course there were the other students, the American students, were also in the room. Srila Prabhupada was never alone in the room. There was somebody fanning, somebody assisting, somebody waiting there to see if anything was needed. So then Srila Prabhupada leant in a little closer and he said, I've understood, it was translated from those in the room, that for these American boys, Krishna only sees the service. He doesn't see the fault. But for you, coming from your illustrious background, if you were to fall down, it would be a great shame. And he actually referred to, even referred to the Americans as, those from such backgrounds, from such, a different, completely different background than this other brahmachari. It's like by so much mercy of Lord Chaitanya and Srila Prabhupada that those who were not essentially qualified to, who ordinarily wouldn't have received any of this knowledge if it wasn't for Srila Prabhupada. So many people, so many different persons have tried to spread this knowledge throughout the world. But Srila Prabhupada was the only one to really truly be successful in this. To literally go out and enter America in the 1960s, to go into the East Village, where still today there are all kinds of personalities there. And even then, like later on, his disciples would say, oh, Srila Prabhupada, now in that area of the East Village, it's not like it was when you were there. And Srila Prabhupada said, oh, what is different? What is who is there? And they would say, oh, there's all kinds of people, describing like different kinds of strata of human society. And Srila Prabhupada said, oh, it was like just like that when I was there also. And he mentioned, this is a wonderful place for preaching. You will make devotees here. And of course, still today, there are great devotees who are doing prasadam distribution there, which is helping conditioned souls get their first foothold on that of this ladder, making them favorable towards devotees and towards this process of devotional service. So we can start to understand the mercy that we're given, and that in this way, as Srila Prabhupada was trying to describe to his disciples when he was at this planet, perhaps not so openly, but what motivated him so much to give this, because he could see the state of affairs when he first came here. When he first came to America, the first thing that Srila Prabhupada did was what? He watched and he observed what was going on. And he tried to understand, how can I give these people, how can I give them this the highest of all philosophies? How can I begin to give this to them when, these are the activities that are popularized here? We understand that Srila Prabhupada came from himself from an affluent family. He came from, this a traditional background, and at that time India was still really quite traditional in its values. in family values, in its society as well. And then to come and see, what we see in our history, in Western history, it's known as, like the revolution of love and peace. And we all look back, it's like a heyday of individuality, of expression. And it was. But at the same time, it was also a flourishing of an acceleration of other things happening in society, which essentially meant that people, women were becoming more and more unprotected, and that essentially that meant that children are being raised differently, in less protective, complete family situations, because we understand that, in the traditional Vedic way, and still practiced to some extent today in India, we're seeing that the complete family doesn't just mean, what is it called, 2.4 children or something, like the atomic family, where you have, the mother and father, and there's a brother and a sister, but it's an extended family. It's a big family. It's a big support system. So here we are, oftentimes estranged from our families, wandering around, looking for something, somehow or other being most fortunate to come across this, the highest thing that we can actually attain in our human existence. So this is why ultimately Krishna is just saying we come from a valley of faults, we come from a most unfortunate situation, and somehow or other we've found this. So against all odds, having found this, Krishna is he's only really seeing our endeavor. It's like, oh my goodness, I haven't seen this soul in so long, in so many thousands and thousands of lifetimes. They've been in this perpetual cycle here and there, everywhere, forgetful of me. But now they've just had a tiny little glance towards me. Of course, I'm going to try hard, I want this jiva to be able to remember me, because he just had a glimmering moment of remembrance. Okay. It was a very long answer to your question. Thank you so much. Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki. Hare Krishna.